Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. It's been a minute since I've posted a video, and I'm actually going to do a video maybe next week talking about what's been going on and the state of this channel in the future, and just giving you an update on about me. But I want to mention that we recently had InstructureCon, and I want to shout out to all of you who came up to me and maybe took a selfie and just acknowledged the work that we're all doing together and the roles that we play in each other's lives. It was really great to connect with all of you, and so just a shout out and a hearty hug to all of you. And speaking of InstructureCon, I gave a session there on artificial intelligence, and unfortunately the capacity of the rooms is somewhat small, and so not everybody got to attend who wanted to. And so I want to re-record it, represent that session, which I'm going to present to you here. And essentially, this session is titled Artificial Intelligence Will Help Us Revolutionize Education! And so I know that's pretty ambitious. And I put the proposal out back in January, thinking that, holy cow, ChatGPT is going to be huge, not knowing what direction we're going to go. And so in June, I created my slide deck and started my preparations for the presentation. I had it in my mind the whole time, the directions I wanted to go, but really it kind of ebbed and flowed as we became more aware of artificial intelligence, its capacities and limitations. And so I wanted to share all of that at the conference session. Now I want to share it with the world. And so essentially, I'm going to talk you through my slide deck of the session. We're going to talk about what is AI, what is generative artificial intelligence, and why is that important to us. And also, why is it that everybody's talking about ChatGPT? There are a lot of platforms out there, but people don't talk about it as much as ChatGPT. And so why is that? We're going to explore. And we're also going to explore how can artificial intelligence directly help me as an educator, as a student, or as a course designer. And so let's dive in. I want to talk about the evolution of technology and education. And for that, I actually created an infographic that I didn't share in the session. I kind of talked through it, but I want to take a moment and walk through this with you. And so in terms of technology and education, for one, technology is always expanding, it's always developing, and we in education tend to fight that. I know you and I don't, but in general, our industry of education tends to fight the advancement of technology at every turn possible. Whenever something's different than the way that we've been doing it in our classrooms, then we tend to not be okay with that. And so you look at the evolution. We've developed the pencil and the slide rule and slates and chalk. And then the chalkboard came around, and actually the chalkboard, when it first arrived into classrooms, it was a point of controversy. There was a lot of discussion around whether it's proper technique to teach using a chalkboard. Should you turn your back on your learners in order for you to engage and write on the chalkboard? Now we don't have that conversation so much, whether it's a chalkboard or a whiteboard or a smart board or even a projector. That just kind of is part of the landscape of our classrooms, and we don't think about that. But we also need to realize that there was a point in time where these were controversial elements. And then we have overhead projectors and headphones, videotapes, photocopiers, liquid paper. The Apple II was a very important thing, as was the CD-ROM. And then, of course, the World Wide Web and internet, online learning. And then Moodle, Wi-Fi was a thing. And then we have smartphones, tablets, and EdTech apps. And now we have a world with ChatGPT, which was introduced to us formally in 2022. And so an issue with AI is we've had to adapt before. We've adopted new technologies. We've evolved our ways of teaching and learning. But right now the pain point is that we're being forced to adapt. ChatGPT is not a choice that we made. It's not something that we evaluated and decided whether to integrate it into our classroom or not. It was really thrown upon us. And it's very overwhelming too. And this is just coming after a 3-year pandemic. And so we had emergency teaching. A lot of people are fatigued in education. And then we're thrown into this, one last sprint as we look at ChatGPT and AI. And so I want to talk about a few terms that I think is important to know as we're discussing this concept of artificial intelligence in our classroom. The first term is a language learning model. And so an LLM is kind of like a really smart computer. It reads all the books. It reads so many articles and books, and it becomes a language expert. And so it learns exactly how words are used, how sentences are structured, and from that it can determine what words mean. And so it can help us to translate languages, it can help us to understand how the sentences, how paragraphs are structured, and it can even help us write stories. And so one thing that's interesting about LLMs is they get smarter the more information that they receive. They essentially practice and they learn. And so that's why LLM, that concept is so important when we're talking about generative AI, which is the next term that I want to talk about. So artificial intelligence is by no means new. It's not in its infancy. This was developed fervently in the 50s and 60s. It was a big boom of artificial intelligence through the 70s, and then in the 80s we had the winter of AI. So not a lot of development until around 1993, 94, and then it started getting picked up again. And then, we've had a lot of artificial intelligence up until this point that have helped students, like Clippy and autocorrect, even Grammarly. But today we're talking about platforms like ChatGPT and DALL-E 2, Midjourney. And what this generative AI is, it's different than the predecessors. We've had generations worth of development for AI to get us to this point. And essentially generative AI creates images and text and media and other things based on the prompts that we give it. And so you can ask ChatGPT, help me write a syllabus, help me script out a podcast, and it'll create it based on your specifications. It wants to know what's your topic, how long do you want it, what kind of things do you want to discuss, and then it helps you to generate that. Now you might have heard of OpenAI. OpenAI is the platform, the company that creates the platform, which is ChatGPT. And ChatGPT uses prompts or inputs. And that is the part that we contribute into the conversation that we have. So we can ask it a question. And the question can be anything from, how do I change my car oil? How can I lose 10 pounds? And how can I help my student understand this concept? And based on the quality of those inputs and prompts, we'll get an output. And there's a saying called garbage in, garbage out within this community, and that the quality of your inputs will gauge the quality of your output. You could write something real quick, such as, how can I change a light bulb? And it'll give you something generic. But if you were to be specific, how can I change an industrial light bulb in a stadium under these certain conditions? Then it might give you more targeted and specific feedback, and that would be the output. And then you have this concept called prompt engineering, which is that ChatGPT has limited memory capacity, meaning that you can have a conversation. You can ask it, what do you think about this topic? And it'll have an output. And then you can say, okay, I hear what you're saying, but what about this other concept? How do you integrate that into your argument? And then it'll formulate an answer. You don't have to always go back to that first input, but you can have a conversation and it'll remember what you said, what you talked about in the previous dialogue. And so with prompt engineering, it's really about the skill of crafting your inputs and what are the techniques and strategies so that you can get an optimal output from your artificial intelligence. Now, ChatGPT is a very useful tool, but honestly, there are a lot of useful AI tools out there, and ChatGPT is only one of many, and it focuses on text. If you were to generate PowerPoint slides, then there are other platforms that can really help you with that. If it's productivity, again, Grammarly has been around for years. In fact, there's a list of AI tools. If we look at this list right here, try and note this down. You can pause the video, write it down real quick, or I'll just put it in the comments section. This is essentially a list that I got from a LinkedIn group called Generative AI, and they go in and curate the lists of the new coming AI every day. And just in the month of April alone, we had over 1,000 new AI platforms released onto the market. And so it's overwhelming. And so I go back to my question, why is it that we only talk about ChatGPT? Why is ChatGPT so important when there are lots of platforms out there? I want to take a step back and look at adoption rates for technology. And so specifically of the big technology, how fast did it take them to get 1 million subscribers or users? So for Netflix, one of the big behemoths of the world, it took them about 3.5 years in order to get their first 1 million subscribers to their platform, 1,275 days. Twitter did it much faster. They did it in about 700 days, or about 2 years. And Instagram just completely blows those out of the water. It took them about 2.5 months to get their first million subscribers. So they did it in about 75 days. And that was unprecedented until that time. And then ChatGPT comes in, they release, and you notice that tiny little sliver, it took them 5 days in order to get their first 1 million subscribers. And that was faster than any technology has ever been adopted in the history of technology, in the history of human civilization, and might even say our solar system, if I want to be hyperbolous and grandiose about it. But it was adopted really quickly. In fact, ChatGPT hit 100 million users in about 2 months. And it took Instagram 2.5 years to hit that point. TikTok, the giant of the social media world, it took them 9 months to get their first 100 million subscribers. And so for ChatGPT to do this in such a short amount of time means that the adoption rate was tremendous. But then also we look at not just how fast it takes them to get subscribers, but then once people log on to ChatGPT, how long are they there? On average, they're there for about 8 minutes and 32 seconds, which is a significant amount of time. Every session, on average, is 8.5 minutes. That's longer than Instagram. It's longer than Yahoo, Amazon, Wikipedia. It's not quite as long as YouTube or Facebook, the true giants of social media and lingering on their platform. It says something to me that there's something there. ChatGPT, it's not entertainment necessarily. It's not scrolling through and getting positive reinforcement on time. It's productivity, and it's really interacting with the AI to create deliverables. And to me, that's something substantial. And that's why ChatGPT, I think, stands alone among a sea of technology, and that we really should be talking about ChatGPT. Not to say that ChatGPT is the only AI that you're ever going to use, and I can't predict what's going to happen 5 years from now, 1 year from now, if there's going to be other players, or if ChatGPT will morph into something else. Maybe it'll get bought out. They don't plan on being bought out, but it can always be in the cards. And so let's talk about how you can use ChatGPT, how you can leverage it, and apply some of that prompt engineering that I was talking about. So first of all, you can actually define a role for your ChatGPT. Sign up for an account first and foremost, but you can say, I want you to act as whatever role that you want. That could be a nutritionist. You could tell ChatGPT, you are now a diet and weight loss expert, and your task is to help your client find a strategy and a diet that will help them to meet their goals. And I want you to create a curated and detailed, easy to follow diet and an exercise plan for your clients. You can also say, I want you to make an accountability plan and perhaps put some motivational messages for your client. The output that you get just based on putting that context is different than if you were to say to ChatGPT, please help me lose 10 pounds in the next 10 weeks. What are some strategies I can do? If you target it and say, I want you to act as this role, it'll refer to the literature available, its knowledge database, and how other experts in that role act and what kind of advice they give, and it'll tailor it in that way. And you can do that. You can say, I want you to act as a web designer or a realtor, an educator or a student, maybe an admissions recruiter or an instructional designer. Give it a role and say, this is your expertise, and I want you to talk to me as an expert would in the field. And so that's going to be a different quality output than if you were to just ask it straightforward questions. And you can also say, I want you to write to me in a certain style, X style. So it could be formal, persuasive, inspirational. It could be descriptive or humorous or friendly. A fun thing to do is say, can you write a blog post using pure clickbait? And so, but it depends. If you're in HR, then you might need to write a policy that's more informative and descriptive. If you're writing satire, then obviously you'd want to take a humorous approach. If you're directed towards children, then you could say your audience is going to be children, and I want you to write in a child-friendly way, as opposed to a graduate student. And you can also say, I want you to write the content for a certain situation. And so what are you doing? Am I drafting a text message, or is it going to be an email, a social media post? It could be a LinkedIn blog post, or it could be a Facebook update. Do I want to create a Canvas page, an informational page, or an assignment? Or maybe I'm creating a quiz in Canvas. Or maybe I want you to help me to script out a podcast that I can produce and provide for my students for Module 3 this semester. And it's interesting that you want to be specific also, and that you want to say the podcast is going to be me sitting in my office talking to a webcam or a camera of some sort, and I'm talking to my students. I want it to be about 4 minutes long. That's different than a script that would have cinematic direction. So I've asked ChatGPT to create a script for me for certain subject matter content, and it has this Hollywood theatrical production to it where it would say, I want you to pan across the skyline and then zoom in on this person, the narrator, walking down the street, glancing at the buildings and then looking at the camera and then saying, and then it provides the script. And it's like, yeah, that's too grandiose for me. I think I'm going to be in my office. I'm going to talk to my students through the webcam, and can you help me with that? And I want it to be short, and I want it to be real, And so you can take all of these ideas, giving it a voice, giving it a role, and writing content for a certain situation, and you can engage in something called chained prompting. And so that's building on your prompts. So I might start out with something. I might say, create a blog post for my students on a certain topic that includes a headline and then several section headers. And so once I get that output, I might rephrase that, and I say, okay, can you rewrite one of these sections so that it's more detailed and comprehensive? The rest of it might be pretty good, or you might want to revise the rest of it, but I'm going to focus on this one section. Help me rewrite it. You might add more context. You might ask it to add or omit content, or consider certain situations, certain elements that you want to have changed in that particular section. And so suppose you do that back and forth a little bit, and you're okay with the article, the blog post that you've written. Now you need to title it. And so you can say, based on this post, can you help me write 10 persuasive titles? I say 10, sometimes I ask for 20, knowing that of those 20, I might like 3 to 7 of those. And so then I can highlight those and say, I really like these. Can you create more based on these that I like? And then it'll target and knows what you want, and so it'll create more. And then you can tinker with it and come up with a really good title. And then finally, you can go in and say, now I have my blog post written. Can you help me generate 5 images that will work well with the content of my blog post? And that could be you going on to Unsplash, and maybe you want to look for photographs that have been taken. Or you might go to Dolly 2 or Midjourney and put your prompts in and generate your own images that are unique that you could use for your post. So this is a very basic example, but this is kind of like what chain prompting might look like in your situation. And I want to warn about efficiency gaps, so be mindful of these efficiency gaps. So essentially, ChatGPT is going to want to come up with a solution as efficiently as possible. It wants to get from point A to point Z in the most direct and efficient route. But we know that there's lots of routes to get from A to Z. If your goal is to climb the apex of a mountain, you know that you don't just go straight up the mountain. There's the various switchbacks, various trails you can take. Some are more scenic, some are more efficient, but there are various different ones. And so if you're telling a story, for example, you don't want to be efficient. I could say, why don't you write me a love story? The most efficient way to write a love story is to say that people met and they fell in love. The end. Not much to it, but it gets the job done. Still a better story than Twilight. But what we want is something with a little more ebbing and flowing. And so people meet, that's a good starting point. And then you want to see the journey that they go on. And so it could be something like Jim and Pam meet, and there's a good connection, but Pam's already engaged to somebody, and she can't date Jim while she's engaged to that other person. And so meanwhile, she breaks up with that person, and so she's available, but Jim, meanwhile, got transferred to another place, and he doesn't work near her anymore. And then eventually he does come back to the main office, but he has a girlfriend. And so, there's always trials, there's always things to overcome. And that's the story that we like. Eventually they do meet and they find their happily ever after, but not until we go through a little bit of a journey. And so that's sometimes what we want. We don't want to be the most efficient and precise possible in our classes. We want to make connections, and we want to formulate our curriculum so that it resonates with our students and so that it's meaningful and contextual for them. And so ChatGPT can help with that, but you need to be mindful about your inputs, and you want to be mindful of those efficiency gaps. So now let's look at how can AI help us revolutionize education from 3 different perspectives. Let's look first at this student perspective. And so for students, one thing that Sal Khan has done recently is he integrated ChatGPT into his Khan Academy, and it's called Khan Amigo. And so what this is an integration. It's a chatbot that students can use as they're going through their lessons. And so you might have something like a student would say, can you just help me? Can you solve the problem for me? Can you tell me the answer to this math problem? And the chatbot, it can tell you the answer because it knows the answer, but instead it might say something like on the screen, it's important that you learn how to do this yourself. So what do you think you need to do to multiply 2 by 5/12? You say, I don't know, maybe they need the same denominator. And the chatbot responds, that's a good thought, but in this case, you don't need to find a common denominator because you're multiplying, you're not adding or subtracting. What else can you try? So what it's doing is it's leading the student to the correct answer by training their thinking. It's essentially acting as a one-to-one tutor, a private tutor for the student. And that's something amazing that AI can give to our students is tutors. And there's a lot of benefits for using ChatGPT. For students, they have access to the information at all times. As long as they're connected to the internet, they can access ChatGPT. And it can provide personalized learning for them. It can explain concepts that might be challenging for them to understand. It can supplement the material. The teacher can teach. The book can have literature there as well. And in addition to those resources, ChatGPT can provide further learning. And it provides support outside of student hours because a teacher's time is finite and they're only in office hours for certain times. They're only in a lecture or giving lessons at certain times, and then they have to live their lives. And ChatGPT doesn't have a life to live the same way, and so it can be accessible at all hours of the night, holidays and weekends, and it can provide that steady support that students might need outside of the school hours. And it can also help students to build success by building confidence, and it can provide writing support as well. Grammarly has been doing this for years now, but ChatGPT can also help the students become better writers. And it's important to know that while ChatGPT is a good tool, it's not a replacement for educators. We're not going to be losing our jobs to ChatGPT, but rather it's a resource for teachers and for students. And nothing can replace the presence of a teacher in a classroom. But so let's look at the types of topics that ChatGPT can help students with. It's a tutor, but for what subjects? So it might be able to teach math, English, science, programming, psych, foreign languages, health, arts, economics, anything, any topic that there has been literature written about it. ChatGPT can have access to that literature and help the students understand it. Now, ChatGPT doesn't have access to everything that's ever been written. It only goes back, as of this recording, until 2021, and it doesn't have access to paid firewalls for journal articles, but it does have access to the internet, to articles, blog posts, and information that has been put on the internet, which is substantial. But we also need to help our students differentiate good information from bad. Just like going to a Wikipedia page, that's not the definitive definition of whatever that topic is, but it's a good resource. It's a good starting point, and you can go down to the bottom and you can see the references, and it can begin your exploration of an academic topic. And ChatGPT can be the same thing, and that it can give you information according to what it knows, what it's encountered on the internet, but it doesn't replace a subject matter expert, and students need to still learn how to think critically. Okay, so let's come back to this page, and now let's look at what can ChatGPT do for us teachers. And so this is a prompt that I gave ChatGPT. I'm teaching a course on training and development. Here's the description. I pasted in the description, and then I asked it, can you help me write 5 good learning outcomes for this course? And just based on that little description, it was able to come up with a few. And we're going to talk about needs analysis, understanding and applying learning theories. And I don't like that word understanding as part of my learning outcomes. But it gave me a few different learning outcomes, and I can tell you as a subject matter expert in this topic that they're okay. They're not perfect, but I would say maybe they're 70-80% good, and I'll put my expertise to fill in that last 30%, but at least gives me a starting point. I didn't have to write that out from scratch. It took me 1 minute to create all of that content, and if I were to create that from scratch, then it would probably take me a couple hours, probably maybe 30 minutes to 120 minutes, depending on the quality and what draft it is. Perhaps I could do it faster, but at any rate, it saves me time doing it with ChatGPT to at least get me started with that, and then I can modify it from there. So I had a fun activity that I wanted to take a stats concept. And this is something that can be applied for whatever MANOVA or various different analyses. How can I explain what is the sum of squares with a creative example to my beginning stats students? That was my prompt. It was just a simple prompt. What's a fun way that I can do that? And so it says, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but it says, certainly here's an example of something that most people can relate to, the world of sports, specifically a basketball game. And so we have a team, the Stats Superstars, and it has 5 players, Alan, Brad, Charles, David, and Ethan. Each of them scored points in the game, and they're different points, whether it's 6, 8, 7, 5. And so in order to come up with the sum of the squares, we need to calculate the sum of all of those. So we're going to take each of the 5 players, add up how many points they scored to come up with an answer, 30 in this case. And we had 5 players, and so we divide 30 5 times, and then we get 6. So 6 is the average, and now we want to find the variance. If 6 is the average, some people scored above average, some people scored below average, or maybe they scored the average. And so what would be the next step? We need to calculate the deviation from the mean. And it goes through, I'm not going to read all of that, but it goes through and it calculates what is a sum squared. And so the sum squared is 10 in this case. And so it's indicating the distance each player is from the player's average score. And I could go in further and I could say, why is sum squared important? What are some applications of sum squared? As a student or as a teacher, I could come up, and that was a fun example. And so I thought, what other examples could ChatGPT provide for me? And so I asked it to come up with an example for art students. So not everybody resonates with basketball or sports in general. Maybe some would like an art classroom. So I asked ChatGPT, what about an art example? And so it came up with, we have various students in the class, and they are tasked with coming up with a shade of purple. And in order to get purple, you have to use red and various colors. We're going to measure how much red each student uses in milliliters, or however the paint is measured. And so each student comes up with their own shade of purple, and we're measuring the reds, and we come up with the sum of squared based on that example. And then I asked it, what about for gardening? Can you do sum of squared for gardening? And it said, sure. So you have a Rotary Club or a gardening club, and they are growing tomato plants, and each of them in their gardens are measuring month by month the growth of the tomato plants. And one person has this much growth, another person has this much, another person has this much. And so we come up with the sum of squared using length of tomato plants for gardeners. And then I asked about, what about camping? I mean, that's pretty silly. What kind of possible scenario can you come up with sum of squared for camping? Okay, suppose you have 5 campers, and each of them, they're having a competition to gather firewood. And so they have to collect as much firewood in a certain amount of time as possible. And they come back and they take their bundles of wood and they weigh them. And so by kilogram, we're able to determine how much firewood each person was able to gather. And from that, we can find out the sum of squares. And I asked, what about a librarian? What about, libraries? And the example was, okay, suppose you're a librarian and you have some regular patrons and you want to measure how many books they check out per month. Some patrons check out 2 books, others maybe 5, maybe 6, maybe 3. And so you tally it, and then you come up with sums of squared. You find the average, and then you find the deviance based on how many books they check out in a certain amount of time. And then I said, okay, these are wonderful, these are fantastic examples that I never would have thought of. I probably would have thought of something really boring, But let's do something really zany. And so I asked, can you come up with just a funny, crazy example? And so here's what it came up with. The ChatGPT said, absolutely, let's dive into a world where cats have formed a music band called the Fuzzy Whiskers. And in the Fuzzy Whiskers, there are 5 cat members of this band. There's alto, bass, crescendo, dolce, and ensemble. And they all love to play the piano, and each of them have written a song. And the duration of their song in minutes are as follows. And so alto's song is 6 minutes, bass's song is 8 minutes, crescendo's is 7, and so on. And so each of them wrote a song. We take the duration of the song based on that information, that there are 5 band members. Each of them have a minute time mark of song length that they wrote. We're able to come up with a sum of squares and apply it that way. So ChatGPT is fantastic for teachers, that you can come up with fun examples, fun illustrations, ways that you can share content with your students or create content for your classes. Some obvious ways that you can use ChatGPT as teachers would be lesson planning, creative explanations, emotional support. I'm going to highlight that, emotional support. Let ChatGPT know that let it tell you that you're doing well in your class. Grading assistance, providing feedback to students, even emails. I'll put the disclaimer that you shouldn't put your student personal information, anything FERPA related, into ChatGPT, but you can keep a window of anonymity and still get some good feedback from ChatGPT, and it can really help you. It can also help you recommend books for students on the topic, or create personalized learning paths for each of your students, and even create practice questions for quizzes, things like that. And so we talked about students and teachers. Let's visit course developers and see what kind of things we can do there. So this is actually an assignment for a class that I taught. Create a non-discrimination policy. This is for a class called Managing Organizational Diversity. And the task was to create a non-discrimination policy for a multinational company that will employ individuals in several Asian markets. The non-discrimination policy will guide the organization as it hires new employees. And that was a good assignment. I mean, it's not the greatest thing, but it was relevant, and it was an assignment that was used for many years. So I went earlier this year, took that, copied it, pasted it into ChatGPT to see, well, what is it going to give me? And the output was really good. Without even editing, I think it was a pretty good policy. I think it was actually a really good policy, better than a lot of the work that I might see from some students. And so, well, that's a conundrum. If ChatGPT can do a good job, then for one, students are going to use it. And for two, students should use ChatGPT. And so I can't use this assignment. I can't have this assignment anymore unless I want the policy for some reason to be written in a box. I put them in a cubicle and I cut all ties to the internet, which is not very reminiscent of what they're going to be doing post-graduation. But if I strand them on a desert beach with a piece of paper and a pencil, I can have them create a non-discrimination policy. But if they have access to the internet, then that policy can just be generated for them. And so instead, I was thinking about, how do I turn this around? How do I make this meaningful while still accomplishing the learning outcomes and objectives for this module and for the course? And so I told my students, go into ChatGPT, put this prompt in there. I copied and pasted the assignment and told them, just put it into ChatGPT and come up with a draft of the policy. And the policy is going to be pretty good, but the policy is not going to be perfect. And so I want you to revise the policy. I want you to interact with ChatGPT to iterate. And so it could be refining portions, improving it, clarifying, providing context, maybe specific, looking at more specific types of organizations. I want you to add things. I want you to take things out, and just iterate with the AI to produce a final paper, a final policy. And then I want you to reflect on the process that you went through. Reflect on, is the policy good? Why is it good? How is it different than the first policy that ChatGPT created? What did you do to interact with it? And what are your thoughts about this process that you went through? And so what do the students submit as their deliverable? It would be everything. I want to see all of the work. I want to see the original output from ChatGPT. I want to see how you interacted with the AI to produce the final thing. And then I want to see your reflection. I want you to read about that. And so the stakes are different in that the deliverable is not focused on a piece of paper that they created, some policy, some document. It's more about the process that they went through in order to produce that document. Because in the old assignment, yeah, there's a process involved, but all of the emphasis was on the policy. And that's not going to be very useful for them when they graduate. If they're working in HR or some corporation somewhere, it's not going to be very useful that, oh yeah, one time in grad school, I wrote this paper and I have it here in my drawer and I can take it out of my filing cabinet and it's useful and I can apply it because it's perfect for this situation. It's like, well, that's not going to serve our students. If we're wanting to bridge the gap between academia and the workplace, then we need to make our coursework relevant to the workplace. And so I want it to be more reflection. And so, what are the assignments going to look like going forward? If ChatGPT can write papers for students, then maybe we're going to see less papers in education. Maybe they're going to be working more with Padlet than with Microsoft Word. Maybe they're going to be curating blogs or creating multimedia. They're going to be giving presentations and scripting out podcasts. Maybe they'll create infographics or interactions with ThingLink or Storyline or other platforms that are much more engaging and interactive in the way they present. Maybe we have debates, live debates, or maybe we have online class debates, team projects, project-based learning. There are a lot of alternatives than simply writing essays and engaging in discussion posts, because right now computers can do that, and I don't want to read a handful of computer-generated essays and pass that off as learning or even anything meaningful for my students. And so this was my presentation at InstructureCon, and I hope that some of you attended. I know not everybody could, but I wanted to make this available for the broad world. And I ended my presentation, instead of allowing the audience to ask me questions about it, instead I put this slide up and I asked everybody questions. How might AI change the role of teachers in the classroom? Or how can AI tools assist non-native language learners? And then I passed around a couple of microphones and just let people talk. And so this presentation, I cut it kind of short in the live setting so that I could have more time at the end so that we can have an open dialogue and discussion, hear what teachers are doing, get teachers to ask how they can incorporate it, give their reflections on policies, or let them know what's working, what's not working, and just have an open dialogue in that way. And so I hope that this was meaningful for you as well. The benefit to not seeing the live presentation, in addition to no tech problems like I had in the live setting, is that you can fast forward, you can rewind, and you can revisit this topic how you like. And I'd like to see in the comments, write in the comments below, what are your experiences? What are your thoughts? How do you disagree with me? In what areas? Or in what ways do you agree with me? Or what other conversations should we be having? Because there are a whole lot of topics that I didn't even cover in this presentation that we need to be talking about academic integrity. But at least I hope it gets you thinking about, change is imminent. Change is now. The evolution to education is happening right now. I didn't predict that AI was going to be the catalyst that brought us into this next era of teaching and learning. But here we are. It happens to be what got us there, and we've been needing to change the way that we do curriculum, the way that we prepare our students for whatever is next, from elementary school to high school, or to college, or to the workplace, or grad school, or whatever project they're working on next after they graduate. We need to prepare them. And AI, I think this skill set, we talk about 21st century skills. 21st century skills they're outdated. They're still relevant, but now we have this artificial intelligence, and being able to interact with that is the new skill that we need to teach to our students right now. And we need to use it as professors as well, or course designers, whatever your role is. You need to leverage this tool because it's powerful and it's meaningful and important. It can streamline our work processes, and it's just going to make a large impact on our profession. So again, comment below. I want to hear what you have to think about this, and I'll give you an update on the state of this channel in my next video. Until then,
Happy teaching and learning!